American Maritime Voices was created to help you speak up, show your pride, and when needed, push back. The future of maritime is in your hands, and its story needs to be told. Will you help tell it?
Welcome back to the American Maritime Podcast, powered by Big Wig Podcasts. We're glad to have you aboard. I'm your host, Sara Fuentes, and today we are excited to have Jim Weakley calling in from the great state of Ohio. Jim is president of the Lake Carriers Association, and he serves as the American Maritime Partnership's Secretary-Treasurer. Welcome, Jim.
Glad to be here.
To start us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the maritime industry and the Great Lakes specifically?
Thanks. Well, I'm an Army brat. My dad was in the Army, he was in the infantry and then in Special Forces. And I was started out as a Sea Cadet. My dad gave me some good advice. He said I could serve my country and still get a hot cup of coffee. And so I went from Sea Cadets to the Coast Guard, spent 4 years at the Academy and then several years sailing. I had 2 years as a shipboard engineer and then did ship inspection. Actually studied Great Lakes shipping for 6 months in an industry training program. And then 4 years later, an opportunity arose to join Interlake Steamship. And I thought it was time to switch to the Coast Guard Reserves, and the rest, as they say, is history.
That's great. Thank you so much for your service in the Coast Guard. We are very grateful to you and all of our Coasties. And tell us a bit more about the Lake Carriers Association. What makes the Great Lakes so important to our nation that they need their own association, own advocate?
So the Lake Carriers Association has been around since the 1880s. We think we're the oldest trade association in the United States. We represent U.S. flagships moving exclusively on the Great Lakes, primarily iron ore, coal, limestone, cement, grain. We always say we're the pilot light of North American manufacturing, and we move the building blocks of North American manufacturing.
Yeah, it sounds really foundational. Like if anything happened to those critical cargoes, that our economy would be in deep trouble. Is that right?
Agreed. And not just in the Great Lakes region, but in the United States. There's a really good Department of Homeland Security report that talked about the criticalness of the Soo Locks, which connects Lake Superior to Lake Huron. If that lock were to go out for 6 months, literally 11 million Americans would lose their jobs, and 3 to 5 million Canadians and Mexicans would lose their jobs based on just the supply chain that we enable for steel. But as I said, it's not just the Great Lakes region. Michigan, no surprise, 944,000 jobs are at risk. But in Texas, there are 865,000 jobs that depend on the steel supply chain that we create. And even in California, there are 691,000 jobs dependent on the steel that we create here in the Great Lakes region.
Wow, those lakes are very great indeed and very important to us. And tell us about the connection to the Jones Act. Why does the Jones Act matter to the Great Lakes region?
Moving cargo between U.S. ports on U.S.-owned, U.S.-built, U.S.-crewed ships is foundational to our nation. Literally, the concept goes back to our founding fathers, and it enables us to build ships here on the Great Lakes to provide life-sustaining, family-sustaining jobs, and equally important to secure our supply lines. As we saw in COVID, supply lines really aren't all that secure when they're moved by foreigners.
Yeah. So it sounds like the Jones Act is really critical to economic security in the Great Lakes, with all those jobs that you mentioned, falling not just from the Great Lakes, but around our nation, depend on the Jones Act, the Jones Act in the Great Lakes.
Agreed. And really not just economic security, but look at our national security. We have shipyards here on the Great Lakes as well. People don't realize that we're building naval ships on the Great Lakes. The littoral combat ships are built here at Fincantieri in Marinette, Wisconsin. And they're going to transition from the LCS ships to frigates. Not only do we build them here, but we can repair them here. So there's the robust movement of cargo by Jones Act vessels. There's construction of Jones Act vessels here on the Great Lakes, repair of them, and we're also building skills and building ships for our Navy and our national defense.
And how do you think the Jones Act, with that America Built requirement and the subsequent flourishing of industry in the Great Lakes, help with that defense maritime industrial base, shipyard industrial base that you mentioned affecting our Navy yards?
So we actually are building the ships, but we're also building the parts and pieces, and we're building the skill set. So the skill set can be transferred from our yards to the coast as well. Not that really we want a lot of our ship repair and our welders to leave our region, but it's critical for our national defense, and it's a critical skill set, and it's been that way. In World War II, they were making submarines on the Great Lakes. So we've been doing it for a long time. In fact, in the War of 1812. It was fought on the Battle of Lake Erie, and I always say, dredging is important as well. The British attacked our ships when they weren't finished being constructed in Erie, Pennsylvania, but they couldn't get in because the port was too shallow. And they were able to use camels to float those ships outside of the port and later to beat the British on the Battle of Lake Erie.
What an incredible story. So it sounds like the Great Lakes, the Jones Act, domestic shipbuilding all have a long history in the Great Lakes region, and the Jones Act plays a role in our national security.
Well said. Literally hundreds of years. We go back to the foundation of our country here on the Great Lakes.
American Maritime Voices was created to help you speak up, show your pride, and when needed, push back. The future of maritime is in your hands, and its story needs to be told. Will you help tell it?
In fact, you talked a little bit about shipyard repair. And this winter, the Lake Carriers Association announced that its members invested over $150 million in maintaining their vessels in American shipyards. And why do you think it's important for us to maintain this capacity?
Well, for us, our ships are too big to leave the Great Lakes, so we need that capability here on the Great Lakes. And we're doing re-engine work, we're doing steel work. We're doing basically all the skills and skill sets that are required in new construction, our repair work. We believe on the Great Lakes, since it's a freshwater environment, we can make our ships last a long time. We think it's more environmentally sound and more economically efficient to maintain our ships rather than to rebuild them. Now, we're blessed by the fresh water. So we literally have a ship that was built in 1906 before the Titanic. It operated over 100 years in continuous economic service. We think that's the only time that's ever been done in the history of the world. And it was only recently converted to a tug barge combination. So that just shows the power of maintaining your vessels for the long haul. And you can have them move smaller cargo. Now, in fairness, originally the vessel moved iron ore, but it became uncompetitive in iron ore, but it was very competitive when it was converted to a cement hauler.
That's incredible. And so I want to touch on something you mentioned. You said your vessels are too big to move. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what you mean that the ships are too big to move out of the Great Lakes? How big are they?
So the Paul Archer Gerthin, which is our largest vessel, we think is the longest vessel in the U.S. flag fleet. It's 1,014 feet long. It's literally as long as an aircraft carrier along the waterline. So it's 1,000 feet long by 105 feet wide by what we call a 56-foot molded depth, which is from the gunnel to the keel. So it's too big to transit the Welland Canal, which is the canal in Canada that gets you around Niagara Falls. Those vessels are built, the lock dimensions there are 740 feet long by 78 feet wide. And that's why I always say the Canadian flag Lakers are built around the Welland Canal dimensions, and our ships are built around the Soo Lock dimensions. So the Canadian Lakers are smaller, less efficient, and not nearly as physically attractive as the U.S. flag Laker.
Amazing. That's a really great American shipbuilding you're describing. Tell us a little bit more about what would happen to your region if the Jones Act were weakened or repealed. It sounds like it's very important to you. So what would those impacts be to the Great Lakes if it were to go away?
Well, I always say that there are foreign interests and foreign entities and foreign vessel operators that want to take our cargo. And when they take our cargo, they take our jobs. And once that goes, it will never come back. I learned in high school as a sea cadet that in the history of the world, no country, we're talking about the Phoenicians, the Trojans, the Spanish, the French, any country that had maritime supremacy and lost it has never regained it in the history of the world. And when I talk about maritime supremacy, I'm talking about both naval superiority and our merchant marine. It's a two-headed monster that keeps our sea lanes safe and secure.
And so it sounds like what we really got to do is protect the Jones Act as that kind of base level foundation bulwark against that decline that other nations have faced.
Absolutely. I always say if there were no Jones Act, there would be no American jobs. And it's not just an economical risk. Think about the homeland security risk and the national security risk that goes along with the Jones Act. After 9/11, I was a recalled Coast Guard reservist. So I stood up the Crisis Action Center here in the Great Lakes. And part of my job was to track all the ships, right?
Right.
And it was a big challenge tracking the foreign vessels and getting crew lists, because a lot of the crew lists were handwritten. They were not legible, the names. We had no idea the nationality of a lot of the crew. We had no idea the risk profile. But with the American vessels, I knew them. I knew the operators. I knew some of the crews personally. So, it was up to me to track what our risk profiles were with the different ships moving on the Great Lakes. And I can tell you it was a lot lower risk profile from a U.S. flagship than it was a foreign flagship.
Right. So I guess you're telling me that if the Jones Act were to go away, you'd need to quadruple the size of the Coast Guard or just accept a lot more risk to our homeland security?
I agree. In fact, it would be an exponential increase to monitor the foreign flagships. It's a kind of a doomsday scenario, but think of the ability to weaponize an ammonium nitrate barge.
Right.
You could literally take out the city of St. Louis. And the eyes and ears on our vessel operators. I can tell you during the initial days after 9/11, we were getting a lot of reports from our U.S. flag vessel operators, telling us what was going on, telling us where things were safe, telling us where things didn't look right. So it is a huge risk profile. I mean, no one takes care of Americans better than Americans.
Yeah, well said. It sounds like those American mariners, American operators, American companies are just a more trusted partner and a known quantity to the Coast Guard as opposed to Flag of Convenience or whoever the cheapest option may be. And I guess too, during post 9/11, there was a lot of talk about soft targets. It seems like our inland waterways would be full of that type of target that we would talk about in that post 9/11 world. Is that right?
Absolutely. In fact, the foreign interests and the foreign states that aren't our friends would gladly subsidize their merchant marine to move up and down our inland waterways, so that if they ever went to war with us, they'd have implanted, ready-made vessel agents to do sabotage and what other kind of mischief they could get into. And between now and then, think of all the intelligence they could gather. I remember when I was stationed in Philadelphia, there was a ship that caught on fire, a commercial ship that caught on fire, and there was a contract for a tug to pull the ship out and take it overseas to the breakers. Well, no surprise, it was a Russian tug that got the low contract because there was a U.S. aircraft carrier that was being overhauled at the Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia, and they wanted to get pictures of that.
Yeah.
So
I bet.
the Russians would have done it for free. Just for the intel they were able to gather around the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard.
Yeah. I mean, that really shows the importance of, American dredging, American tugs, all these kind of smaller craft, and the real importance of making sure those are also American crewed, American owned.
Agreed. It's layers of protection. It's ensuring that our supply chain is secure and that Americans are putting American interests first.
Yeah. Well said. All right, let's zoom back in on the Great Lakes a bit. President Trump did win key states in the Great Lakes region, including Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Tell us why this region is so important to the nation, and how does the American maritime industry fit in?
Well, politically, we're kind of the swing state, right? All of our Great Lakes states, with few exceptions, are swing states. So the presidential elections are always going to be decided in our region. It's a lot of our manufacturing base is here in the Great Lakes region. I already talked about the steel supply chain that we enable. We also have a large manufacturing and agricultural sectors. So, and I think it was even Ronald Reagan always said, how does it play in Peoria? So there's something to be said for, Midwest values, Midwest nice, Midwest manufacturing. if you look at our region, if you combine the Great Lakes region with the two Canadian provinces, our 8 Great Lakes states and those provinces would be the third largest economy in the world, behind only the US and China. So it's an economic might. It's also a political powerhouse, at least during the presidential elections. Every 4 years, they seem to care quite a bit about what people in Cleveland are talking about and thinking about and who are going to vote for.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like all those politicians should really be paying attention to American Maritime, since it's so important to that region if they want to be successful. Uh,
Absolutely.
and tell us more about Lake Carriers Association. Coming up over the next few years, what do you see as your priorities for LCA and for the region overall?
Well, job one is always protecting jobs, and that means protecting the Jones Act. So that's always front and center. That's always our North Star, our guiding light is making sure that our sailors have jobs and our vessel operating companies have a sustainable business profit. So that's job number one. Other areas, I always say our goal, or we exist to kind of stop the government, or at least kind of hinder the government from harming our members and doing things that make their jobs more complicated, unreasonably so. And secondarily is facilitating the government, trying to convince government agencies to help facilitate commerce and the flow of commerce. So we want to build another heavy icebreaker for the Great Lakes. That's key. Completing the $3 billion replacement lock in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, that allows vessels to transit from Lake Superior to Lake Huron. Currently, there's only a single point of failure. If that point of failure to fall down, it would literally create a North American recession. So they're building a second lock for system-wide resiliency. So if there's there's no longer a single point of failure. So getting that finished. And I'll give the Army Corps a shout out. They're on target and on track to finish that project by 2030, and they're on budget. So they're doing a great job with that. The third project, if I guess would be my third priority, is again going back to ice breaking, and that is recapitalizing the fleet of 140-foot ice breaking tugs here on the Great Lakes. They're built in the 70s and 80s. Even though they've got fresh water, they're good hulls. The power plants were not replaced, so they're not as reliable as they used to be, and we need to maintain our what I call them the nautical snowplows. They need to keep our waterways moving and our cargoes moving and our vessels safe in the winter months.
All right. Well, after everything you've said, I hope you accomplish all those goals, or I'll be scared of a American or global recession, given how important the Great Lakes are as an economic engine for not just the region, the country, and it sounds like the entire, North America, all of North America, really.
We'll be doing our best.
And is there anything that you would say is the most misunderstood about the Great Lakes and Great Lakes shipping? Anything that you wish people really knew about the Great Lakes and about what you do and about what your carriers and your members perform?
So I would say there are two things that people outside our region don't understand. One is about our ships, and that our ships are self-unloading vessels. So we have a series of conveyor belts within the hull of the ship that feed a loading boom, and that also has a conveyor belt. So we can literally unload 70,000 tons of cargo in 7 hours. One of our 1,000-foot ships carries the same amount of cargo as 7 unit trains or 700 rail cars or 2,800 dump trucks.
Wow.
The second thing I'll say that people outside our region don't understand is just how big our lakes are. If you look at Lake Michigan alone, it has 1,640 miles of coastline. That's the equivalent of what I call Maine to Miami. It's literally going from Portland, Maine to Homestead, Florida, which is in the Miami area. That's 1,640 miles. That's just one of our lakes. So people outside our region don't understand just how big and vast the waterways are. There's a reason they call them our North Coasts.
Yeah, that's incredible. I did not realize that. That is very impressive. And it sounds like your members are doing a good job of balancing environmental concerns with economic efficiency. The Great Lakes sound like they are beautiful, beautiful jewels for recreation, boating, in addition to economic movement. So how do your members balance that kind of environmental protection with this economic need?
Well, we always talk about, people, planet, and profit, right? It's a balancing act. In order for companies to be sustainable, they have to make a reasonable profit or return on the investment, or they'll eventually go out of business. We live here. That's the other thing. Whenever I testify for Congress, I talk about how our companies and our sailors are based in the Great Lakes region. So we take care of the Great Lakes because we live here. I'm a recreational sailor. A lot of our members are fishermen and hunters. They're great outdoorsmen. So they protect the natural resources and they respect it. So that's part of our balancing act. And sometimes that's a challenge for people that are from outside of our industry or outside of our region. I think there's kind of an attitude that all industry is bad. I've given speeches where I talk about the quality of life begins with one thing, and that's with a job, right? If you don't have a job, it's pretty hard to pay for all those other things. And if you don't believe it, look at the environmental devastation on third world countries. We're blessed here in the Great Lakes because of the freshwater environment. We can make our ships last a long time, and that's why we invested them. We replace steel. We have what I call an erosion problem, not a corrosion problem, right? We don't have corrosion from the salt water. Our iron ore pellets, when they hit the inside of the cargo hold, they erode. So we have to replace that steel. And we go out of our way to make sure that we're protective of the environment, respectful of our people, and that all those things come together to make our ships last a long time and make our company sustainable. Several of my companies have over 100 years in existence. The average lifespan of a corporation in America is 30 to 40 years. I could think of 3 of my member companies that have been in existence for over 100 years.
And let me ask you as well. So you started in the Sea Cadets, Coast Guard. What advice would you have for anyone thinking about a maritime career after listening up to how important maritime is?
I'd say go for it. I mean, I always tell that when we do military to maritime events, or I talk to some veterans, I say, look, in the Merchant Marine and the Great Lakes ships, we pay you better, we feed you better, you get to sleep better, and no one's going to shoot at you. So it's a great career pattern. It's a great opportunity. It pays well. But I guess if I have a caution, I would say be patient with the Coast Guard, or be impatient with the Coast Guard, and make sure you get your documents in months before you ship, because sometimes the process of getting your TWIC card and your Merchant Mariner's document and getting your drug-free certificates, that can take a long time. And that's been a challenge when we try and recruit new people in our industry. Sometimes they get a shoreside job while they're trying to just get their paperwork processed. So be patient and just go for it. That's the other thing I love about our industry, particularly in the Great Lakes. You can start out as a deckhand and retire as a captain of a vessel. You can start out as a wiper in the engine room, and you can retire as a chief engineer. We have a lot of upward mobility, and we have training programs, and we actively like to hire within and train our people. It's a great career path. On the Great Lakes, we're family friendly too. I always, talk about on the Great Lakes, you're never more than 24 hours away from a lock or a dock. If there's a family emergency, you can get home to deal with it. That's a lot harder to do when you're sailing deep sea.
That's great. Thank you so much. Before we close out this episode of American Maritime Podcast, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about American Maritime?
Well, I would say if you care about your job, you ought to sign up for American Maritime Voices and know what's going on, and be part of our group. And if we need you, be part of our flotilla. And so you can reach out to your members of Congress. And if you're a corporate company, you ought to think about joining American Maritime Partnership, because there is no greater defenders. And don't forget that the threat is real. The threat is omnipresent. And there's a reason that the European Union is funding the Cato Institute to try and take down our Jones Act. They want access to our markets. And the only thing standing between your job is the Jones Act. And the only thing protecting the Jones Act is American Maritime Partnership. So do your part, join the American Maritime Partnership, join American Maritime Voices, and protect your job. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
That's all for this episode of American Maritime Podcast. And we hope that our audience will share this show and also, per Jim's suggestion, go to AmericanMaritimeVoices.org and sign up to be a voice on maritime issues. Again, that's AmericanMaritimeVoices.org. Check it out. Jim, thank you so much for being with us today and for teaching us all so much about the Great Lakes. I'm Sada Fuentes signing off.